Good evening. I want to begin with a question. What would you do if you genuinely believed your body was made of glass? Not metaphorically, literally. You would avoid chairs. You'd wrap yourself in blankets. You'd refuse to be touched. This isn't a thought experiment. This was the daily reality for some of the most powerful people in European history. Tonight, we're going to explore the Glass Delusion, one of the strangest psychiatric epidemics ever recorded. And by the end, I think you'll agree it says something uncomfortable about the fragility of all human conviction. Here's our roadmap. First, I'll introduce you to King Charles VI of France, the most famous glass delusion sufferer and the dramatic entry point into this world. Then we'll define the delusion itself, what it was, what sufferers actually believed, and how it manifested. After that, we go deeper into the material revolution of 16th century Venice that made glass suddenly omnipresent, magical, and terrifying. Then we trace how the delusion spread socially through literature, medicine, and elite culture. And finally we ask, why did it vanish, and what fragile beliefs do we carry today? This is not a metaphor. King Charles VI of France, who reigned from 1380 to 1422, refused to be touched by his attendants. He wrapped himself in layers of blankets. He stayed perfectly still for hours, sometimes days. And he did it because he was convinced, utterly, unshakably convinced, that his body was made of glass and would shatter at the slightest impact. Charles wasn't a fringe figure. He was the King of France at the height of the 100 Years' War. His delusion didn't just torment him personally, it destabilized an entire kingdom. And he was far from alone. So let's define this properly. The glass delusion wasn't just a quirky historical anecdote, it was a recognized psychiatric phenomenon that appeared in medical encyclopedias across Europe for over 4 centuries. Sufferers genuinely believed their bodies, or specific body parts, were made of glass. And crucially, glass meant fragility. They were terrified they'd shatter. What makes this fascinating is who it struck. Not random peasants, but the intellectual and social elite. Kings, nobles, scholars, physicians, these were the most educated, most powerful people of their age, and they moved through the world as if they were made of crystal. Let that sink in. Let's look closer at Charles. He wasn't always the mad. His early reign earned him the title the Beloved. But in 1392, while marching with his army, he suffered a sudden psychotic break. He drew his sword and began attacking his own knights, killing several before being subdued. That was the beginning. The glass delusion specifically appeared later, documented by none other than Pope Pius II. And here's what makes this story devastating. Charles's mental illness wasn't just a personal tragedy, it fractured the French monarchy. While he sat wrapped in blankets, convinced he was glass, his uncles and cousins tore the country apart in civil war. That power vacuum is what allowed Henry V of England to invade and win at Agincourt. One man's delusion changed European history. Now we need to step back and ask, why glass? Why did this specific delusion emerge when it did? The answer takes us to Venice, to the island of Murano, and to one of the most underappreciated technological revolutions in history, because glass itself as a material was transforming what it meant to see. Here's what happened in the 16th century. On the island of Murano, Venetian glassmakers perfected a new kind of glass called cristallo, so clear it was nearly invisible. This wasn't just a luxury good. This glass became the substrate for lenses, and lenses changed everything. They restored vision to aging scholars who could suddenly read again. They revealed microorganisms invisible to the naked eye. Telescopes pulled previously unknown moons into view and shattered the medieval cosmos. Glass was simultaneously the most transformative and the most fragile material in European civilization. Imagine living through that. The thing that's revealing the deepest truths of the universe could shatter if you dropped it. That tension, revelation, and fragility bound together is the psychological crucible in which the glass delusion was forged. But the material explanation isn't just about technology. Glass carried immense cultural weight. It was a luxury commodity, rare, expensive, and associated with alchemical magic. Glass was seen as a substance that walked the line between the material and the spiritual. It was solid yet transparent. It existed, yet you could see through it. For a nobleman in early modern Europe, glass became a mirror, literally and metaphorically, of his own condition. He was powerful yet precarious, visible to all yet fragile, one political misstep away from shattering. The historian Edward Shorter makes this case directly. The glass delusion was in part aristocrats internalizing their own social fragility. They looked at glass and saw themselves. But there's a second explanation, and it's equally powerful. The glass delusion didn't just appear in isolated individuals, it clustered, it spread, and it spread through the most modern medium of the time, the printed word. This is the social contagion hypothesis, and it's compelling. The glass delusion didn't strike randomly. It appeared in clusters among people who read the same books and moved in the same circles. When Cervantes published The Glass Graduate in 1613, a story about a scholar who believes he's made of glass, it wasn't just fiction. It may have been a transmission vector. Medical treatises cataloged the delusion, which meant physicians were trained to recognize it, which meant they diagnosed it more often. The delusion spread through the very networks of literacy and elite culture that defined early modern Europe. It was, in a very real sense, a viral psychiatric phenomenon, centuries before social media. Now jump forward to the 19th century. Princess Alexandra Amalie of Bavaria, daughter of King Ludwig I, was one of the last recorded royal cases of the glass delusion. But her version had a fascinating twist. She didn't believe her whole body was glass. She believed she had swallowed a glass piano as a child, and that this piano remained intact inside her. A single wrong move could shatter it. She walked sideways through doorways. She avoided sudden movements. Think about the specificity of that delusion. A glass piano. Not a glass heart or glass bones, but a grand piano swallowed whole. It's almost poetic, and it tells us the delusion had evolved, become more baroque as it was dying out. By the early 20th century, the glass delusion had effectively vanished from medical literature. Let's pull back and see the full arc. Charles VI in the late 14th century is one of the earliest documented cases. By the early 1600s, the delusion had entered literature. Cervantes' The Glass Graduate in 1613 in medical textbooks, with Robert Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy in 1621. The peak is roughly the 16th and 17th centuries. Then a long tail. Princess Alexandra in the mid-19th century is one of the last prominent cases. By the late 1800s, it's gone. 5 centuries. This wasn't a brief fad. This was a persistent, recurring delusion that tracked alongside European modernity itself, and then it just stopped. So which explanation is right? The material hypothesis says Venice invented transparent glass. Glass gave us lenses and telescopes, and this psychological rupture, revelation and fragility bound together, produced the delusion as a kind of cultural processing. The social hypothesis says this was essentially a meme before memes. It spread through books, through medical training, through aristocratic gossip. And here's the unsettling truth. Both theories are probably right. The material revolution provided the raw symbolic material. Social contagion provided the transmission mechanism. The glass delusion wasn't just a psychiatric curiosity. It was the product of a specific technological and social moment, which raises an uncomfortable question. What delusions are we collectively incubating right now, shaped by our own technological ruptures? 400 years. That's how long this delusion persisted. And here's what I find most compelling. Isolated cases still appear today. The BBC documented modern glass delusion sufferers in the 21st century. The delusion didn't go extinct, it went underground, which means the psychological raw material. The sense of being fragile, transparent, one impact away from shattering, that's still with us. We've just found new idioms for it. So I want to leave you with a question, and it's not rhetorical. The glass delusion seems absurd to us. A king wrapped in blankets, afraid his buttocks will break, a princess walking sideways through doorways. It's easy to feel superior, but think about what these people were actually expressing. A profound sense of fragility, a fear that their identity, their very self, was transparent, brittle, and could be shattered by forces beyond their control. Does that sound familiar? In an age of social media where reputations can be destroyed in an afternoon, where identity feels performative and precarious, are we really so different from Charles VI? The glass delusion is a mirror. The question is, what do you see in it? Thank you.